All right. Good morning, everyone. Happy Tuesday, January 30th. Thank you for being here with us early this morning. And we'll be spending the next hour and a half walking through CAPE carryover compliance, and also showing you some of the NOVA enhancements that we've recently completed. Next slide, please. What we will be covering this morning is going over AB 1491 overview. We presented on the subject about a year ago or so, and I know you've been hearing about this, and we wanted to give you a refresher, dive into the policy aspects of AB 1491, member carryover, consortia carryover compliance, and then from there transition us into the technical components of the NOVA enhancements, and finally cover some tools and resources that you can expect to have access to help you with this carryover compliance monitoring. Next slide, please. All right, so I'm going to kick us off. My name is Myra Diaz. I am with the Chancellor's Office. I am the program lead for the California Adult Education Program, and I am welcomed. I'm joined here with my colleagues. I'm going to hand it over to Neil.
Thanks, Myra. Neil Kelly, California Department of Education. I'm Myra's counterpart over at the CDE, and I'll hand it over to Mandalee.
Oh, hi there, Mandalee Gonzalez, coordinator with Cape TAP, and I'll hand it off to Susan.
Hi, everyone. I'm Susan Wynn. I'm with KAI Partners and providing project management and NOVA support, and I'm going to pass it back to Myra.
Thank you. Next slide, please. All right, so this slide, what we're going to do is we're going to take you on a journey with us for the next hour and a half, as I mentioned. The first slide that you're going to see is we're going to walk you through the policy aspects. For some of you, it might be a refresher. For some of you that are new, this might be some complete new information for you. So we're going to help detangle that for you. AB 1491 carryover compliance legislation was updated back in 2022. We officially started the tracking for this current fiscal year 23-24. So we are in the middle of year one of the current tracking for carryover. There are two specific parts to this carryover compliance. There's a member level aspect. There is a consortium level component. The members, actually, and I won't dive too far into this because the next couple of slides, we will be able to dive into and break it out for you even further. So I'm going to transition us off to the next slide, please. As a reminder, this is going to be about a year or so as we get to next month, where the state released policy guidance around the implementation of AB 1491 back in February 27th of 2023. So what did the Cape State Office do? We released official guidance that also included a timeline to give you an idea of how this was going to be rolled out, tracking how that was going to take place, and then a frequently asked question. We've included links so that you can refer back to these guidance memos and timelines to help you as we are in the middle of year one. So definitely a good resource if you don't recall all the information, but we've included the links, and once you have access to the PowerPoint, you will be able to access that information. Next slide, please. All right, I'm going to hand it over to Neil.
Thanks, Myra. Quick question, Mandalee. Just so everybody knows, slides won't be remediated for some time, right? So if they're interested in some of the stuff on the slides, maybe take a screenshot, because there are going to be a lot of details that we're going to be going over. So, and a lot of follow-up on your part when we get to the member carryover compliance. So just a tip there, if something strikes you as interesting, feel free to take a snapshot. So
And like Myra mentioned, there were some areas that had links to them. I've dropped those in the chat. So for the AB 1491 guidance, timeline, and FAQ, you can grab it there. And I hope to have this remediated sooner than later.
All
By the
right.
end of the week.
And even though I'm going to be covering a lot of details, because we have so much to get through, you can hold your questions until later in the presentation today. Thank you. Okay, next slide, please. All right, so compliance for members. We're just going to focus on member carryover compliance. And as you know, that you're not authorized or mandated to have carryover for your members. That's the choice you make in your consortium, to reduce funds by no more than the carryover. So you can't go beyond the carryover if you decide to have a carryover percentage threshold. And if you do vote to, and we'll get into this, vote to reduce somebody's funding, it can't go below the carryover amount. So you can't get into that base funding. Next slide, please. Okay, so I'm just going to repeat kind of what the legislation says. If the consortium makes a finding by a majority vote based on the member having excessive carryover for at least 2 consecutive years, beginning with this year, 23-24, a consortium is authorized to reduce a member's allocation by no more than the percentage of the member's carryover. And I'm going to unpack all this in the next few slides. So next slide, please. Okay, so just going over kind of the big ticket items on the member carryover. It has to be a majority vote. So if you decide to have a carryover percentage, and we'll show you later what that means in NOVA via the CFAD and how that works. But if you decide to have a carryover percentage and you have a member that meets that criteria, then when you vote to reduce that member's funds, in the legislation, it says it has to be a majority vote. And so we also, the definition of excessive carryover in the legislation is not defined. So excessive carryover, member carryover, has to be determined by each consortium. So that's where you decide on that threshold. And like we said, it has to be 2 consecutive years. So starting with this year, 23-24, and then going into 24-25. That would be the 2 consecutive years, but every year starts a new consecutive year. So maybe you don't have carryover, this member doesn't have carryover this year, but maybe next year they have carryover. So then that starts this 2 consecutive year tracking. And we'll get into that and how we track that and enable you to track that as well. Because a lot of this responsibility falls for members on the consortium. And so you have a lot of responsibility here to determine things. So, and we'll get through this slide really quick here. So funds may be reduced no more than the carryover. We talked about that. The amount could be 0% or up to the total amount of the carryover based on, that excessive member carryover threshold that you've determined. Fund reduction is only is for that fiscal year only. It does not impact the base allocation. That's what I talked about before. And the voting can take place soon after or as soon as Q4 is certified. And that usually happens sometime in September. So you could probably plan your meetings, maybe a consortium meeting shortly after that, if you think there's going to be some kind of voting going on, or maybe you do it quarterly anyway. Okay, next slide, please. So getting into unpack excessive carryover, it's not defined in legislation. So each consortia has to define excessive carryover as a percentage of unspent funds from the prior year. So that's that percentage, and we'll show you where you put that in NOVA, in the CFAD. You'll put a percentage, and that becomes the consortia's threshold for determining which member meets or exceeds the excessive carryover. There's also going to be tools in Nova that once you decide on that excessive carryover, it'll track how you're doing quarter to quarter. And then there'll be things like corrective action plans and things like that that are helpers, and of course technical assistance available to help you get through this with your members. So we'll talk about that more later on. And then finally, each consortium defines this percentage annually when completing the CFAD. So each year you'll have a chance to define that, and maybe you're going with 20%, but maybe the next year you say, oh, let's go 25 or let's go 15. So every year you have a chance to change that. And so, you know, when you talk about 2 consecutive years, year 1 could be 20%, year 2 could be 15%, and that's still the 2 consecutive years. So you got to consider that. There are some variations there that could happen. So just, you know, keep your eye on that, be involved. And that's why this would probably be a good slide to take a shot of. So next slide, please. Okay, so looking at from the CFADs from last year or going into this year, here's how the consortia noted their carryover percentage. So, you know, as you can see, we had 1, 40%, 4 at 15, but most of them went with the 20% because that aligns with the consortia carryover at the state level. So we thought, and then you can see that 26 opted out. So let's see, that gives us 45 that opted in. So you can see how many are participating in this and how many are kind of sitting on the sidelines, which doesn't mean this go around, this CFAD, they could opt in. So something to consider. Next slide, please. Okay, and here's getting into the majority membership vote for the membership reduction. So as you know, Ed Code 84914, or maybe you don't know, was amended to state that a finding to reduce carryover made by the consortium shall require a majority vote of its membership to vote and approve. And then we go back to the old 84905 to determine what membership is, and that is any community college district, K-12 district, County Office of Education, or JPA, within the boundaries of an adult education region. So with that definition of membership, each member will have 1 vote, when voting on reducing member carryovers. So because of a membership is defined by a district, so individual locations are not considered districts. It's the whole district with many schools under it, but they only get 1 vote. So you might have governance right now that gives members more votes than 1 vote, 1 district. So you have to reconsider that for the, just for the carryover. You can still have that in your governance for other decision making, but for the carryover, the legislation is very clear that it's 1 member district, 1 vote. So keep an eye on that. Next slide, please. Okay, and then getting into the carryover reduction amount, legislation authorized consortia to reduce no more than the amount of carryover, and that's certified, as we said, at the end of Q4. But however, the legislation doesn't specify a percentage or an amount. So it's up to the consortia to decide what that reduction is appropriate based on a percentage threshold, but no more than the amount of carryover. That's why filling out that CFAD is going to be so critical each year, because you will determine the reduction percentage based on that threshold. And then the vote, as we described in the previous slide, to reduce the members' carryover will affect the prior year carryover only. It won't get into future funding or your base allocation. We're only focused on the reduction of the carryover. Okay, next slide, please. And then here is the carryover reduction process for members beginning this year, 23-24. Consortia must track carryover to determine if a member has excessive carryover for at least 2 consecutive years. And NOVA we'll get into this. We'll show you the tools that we've put in NOVA to allow you to track that. Also, excessive carryover as determined by your consortium will be based on the certification in September as of Q4. On or before, so members certify by September 1st, and then the consortium certification is by September 30th. So I think we'll get into a little bit of how critical that September 30th date is so we can run the excessive carryover calculations and have that show up in NOVA. Consortium must offer members locally determined technical assistance. So with the member carryover, you have to understand the state's not going to come in and say, oh, I notice you have a couple of members that have 1 consecutive year. It's really going to be on the legislation. It says it's up to the consortia to offer locally determined technical assistance to help prevent them from having 2 consecutive fiscal years of carryover. Because you can't go to vote if you haven't offered a reasonable intervention for technical assistance. So you pretty much have to document before you take somebody's money away that you've tried to work with them to alleviate their carryover, maybe thought about doing some things, maybe ask the state TAPS for help, maybe ask the state leadership for some kind of input, but you have to do something in order to move forward. And hopefully that works. We hope that what you're doing locally is going to affect that member and get them on the right track. And then they get down below the carryover threshold. But it's really up to the consortia to offer that locally determined technical assistance. But we will make all kinds of tips, tools, technical assistance available for you, one-on-ones, you name it. We're here to assist with, but you have to take that initiative and track that. Okay, lastly, if the consortium determines that a member has excessive carryover for at least 2 consecutive fiscal years, and like I said, a reasonable intervention, that's the technical assistance by the consortia, has not eliminated the carryover, then the consortia can reduce the members' carryover with that majority vote that we went into a little bit before. Okay, moving right along. So one thing, suggestion or something to consider, your bylaws, because currently some of you have bylaws that are related to, maybe not related to carryover, and maybe you have governance that gives members more than 1 vote. So you really have to reevaluate your bylaws to ensure you're including all these carryover changes to Ed Code. Some things that we want to make sure you're aware of that maybe you want to change in your bylaws is agreement on the percentage of member carryover as defined as excessive. That's what you would be typing in to NOVA and maybe put in your bylaws how you came to that decision. Agreement on the percentage of member carryover that will be reduced. You can say an amount, you can say a percentage, but you can't go over the total carryover amount. But you should have some kind of bylaw that states how you came to the agreement of that reduction amount. And then, of course, the decision-making process of how you adhered to Ed Code and legislation of 1 member, 1 vote on the majority voting process to reduce a member's carryover. And then, of course, how are you going to provide that reasonable intervention through consortia level technical or consortia technical assistance to the members to avoid a carryover finding. And so that should be documented before you go to the vote. So you, checked all the boxes, you did what you could, and the member still is exceeding the carryover threshold after 2 consecutive years. And then that can add to that decision on voting. So let's see, next slide, please. Okay, and then takeaways before I turn it over to Myra to talk about the consortia 20%. Here are some takeaways. Be clear in your consortia governance, how you plan to implement this new legislation, which we just talked about. Make sure you track members and assess annually, maybe even track quarterly. Offer interventions, vote on possible one-time carryover reductions. All kinds of things you can do over that 2-year period. And then consortia need to fill in the gaps on how much will be reduced, that reduction amount, the voting process, the timetables, the check-ins, and utilize any reallocated carryover funds. How are you going to process that? And then consortium members can use tools that we're going to go over today to assist with tracking that are available in Nova. And then finally, there are some risks if you've opted out and you're not tracking this, you could still run the risk of going over 20% as a consortia. And then that's what Myra is going to talk about next. So with that, I'll turn it over to Myra.
Thank you, Neil. So that was a really great overview breaking down the member level carryover compliance. And now we're going to dive into the consortium level carryover compliance and what that additional level of tracking will be looking for. So next slide, please. All right, so for consortium carryover compliance, legislation specifically states the following. AB 1491 requires a consortium with carryover from one or more prior fiscal years exceeding 20% to submit a written expenditure plan to the chancellor and the superintendent. The chancellor and the superintendent will then prescribe and assign technical assistance to that consortium to ensure that adequate adult education services are provided to the region in proportion to the region's available funding. I'm going to dive into the next slide and break it down a little bit further. So I did want to point out our timeline for this tracking. So with the consortium carryover, there are 2 action items that will, or flags that will populate from a consortium level standpoint if the consortium is exceeding carryover. One, legislation identified the threshold. It calls out 20%, whereas at the member level carryover, the consortium has the ability to designate or not opt in or opt out what carryover threshold they would like to be tracking for their members. At the consortium level, as I mentioned, it is outlined, specifically outlined that it's a 20, if the consortia exceeds 20% carryover, then they will be flagged, be required to complete a written expenditure plan and prescribed assigned technical assistance. So in regards to the timeline, I did wanted to point out, if you refer to the legislation, even though legislation called for the implementation of carryover tracking to begin with fiscal year 22-23, in order to allow the state to develop and release guidance, along with implementing enhancements in NOVA, and also to allow the field with sufficient time to implement and understand at a local level as they work with their members, the state CAPE office then decided to push the timeline to officially start with fiscal year 23-24. We are currently in the middle of tracking year 1. And so it started at the beginning of this fiscal year, and we will complete our first official tracking of this cycle once Q4 expenditures are certified by September 30th of this year. And the start date includes the tracking of both the member carryover as well as the consortium carryover. We will break it down a little bit further in the next couple of slides as to the importance of these timelines. And I also wanted to note that because of this timeline, the fact that we are in the middle of year 1, there will be some NOVA enhancements that you'll understand why you're not going to be able to see those until we complete that first cycle. There are some areas that are available and accessible to you, as Neil mentioned, working with your members, looking at the current carryover. And this is why we will continue to present and provide you with this information so that you're not caught off guard when September 30th comes and you weren't aware of this information. So we're in the middle of it. Tracking is currently taking place at the member level and then also at the consortium level. Next slide, please. So as I had reiterated earlier, the legislation specifically calls out a percentage carryover threshold, but that is only for the consortium level. And that is 20% consortia carryover. So consortium carryover is one or more prior fiscal years exceeding 20% and is assessed and acted upon annually. The consortium carryover includes the carryover of all its members. So to break that and highlight some key areas here, number one, the consortium carryover is assessed annually. That means September 30th, we will see some flags, or we will be able to identify after September 30th, once Q4 is certified, which consortia have exceeded this 20% carryover threshold. Number two, carryover threshold is clearly identified in legislation as exceeding that 20% carryover threshold. So currently something you should be doing as we are in the middle of this current fiscal year is look at your carryover, work with your members, start having those conversations, because the consortia will be flagged later on this year in September once Q4 is certified. Next slide, please. So we mentioned 2 action items that occur for the consortium. Action item number 1, when the consortium is flagged for excessive carryover, that it calls out in legislation for the consortium to complete a written expenditure plan. And I wanted to specifically highlight this as the consortium written expenditure plan. So AB 1491 requires a consortium with carryover from 1 or more prior fiscal years exceeding 20% to submit a written expenditure plan that will be reviewed by the Cape State Leadership Office. The consortium will be required to complete the written expenditure plan, which will populate in NOVA, and we will walk through these examples because, as I mentioned, you won't see that until later on in September. For those consortia that get flagged, you'll get an idea of what that will look like. And this will also allow the state to track the progress of the expenditure plan. So in that expenditure plan, the consortia will be asked a series of questions. You will also be assigned technical assistance. The consortia will put forth a proposal, how they are planning to address their the member carryover, and submit that in NOVA. Next slide, please. So the other part was the technical assistance. So legislation also calls, in addition to the consortium completing a written expenditure plan, will be for the state to assign technical assistance for those consortia that are flagged to ensure that effective use of funds as specified by policy, and to ensure that the consortium's annual carryover does not continue to exceed the 20% threshold, so that it continues to provide the adequate services to the region. This will include receiving services or support from our Cape technical assistance providers. Neil had mentioned that at the member level, technical assistance, which should currently be taking place, is for the consortia to be providing some technical assistance at a local level. What will happen is, once a consortia is flagged for exceeding the excessive carryover threshold, the state will then come in and assign technical assistance to those flagged consortia, and then also require them to complete a written expenditure plan. Next slide, please. All right, so we are good on time, actually, and we're gonna now transition into, so that was our policy update. Reminder for some of those that have heard this before, but for some of those that are new, breaking it down a little bit further for you. What we are going to transition into now is our Cape carryover compliance NOVA enhancements. And before we dive into these enhancements, I really wanted to point out the disclaimer that you see on the slide, because as we mentioned, we are in the middle of year one. You are not going to see a lot of these updates until the first year is officially completed on September 30th. So at this time, there will be no data populated in NOVA. There will be some, but not all, surrounding the enhancements on the AB 1491 carryover compliance tracking for members or the consortium, as the data isn't going to be available until after the Q4 certification. Some of these screenshots that you're going to see are from a test system. They do not reflect real data, but also we will then transition into an actual live demo and walk through be able to walk you through and see some of the enhancements that are currently there live for you to view. You'll continue to see the importance of this September 30th, and we want you to keep that in mind as we go through these enhancements, because that will be a critical date for you to work on getting your quarterly report submissions submitted on a timely manner, so that carryover can be captured when that is ran. Next slide, please. All right, we're going to dive into the fun stuff now, so bear with me on this. So as we've been working in NOVA and trying to implement these policy updates into a system, one of the things that we identified is, some of the pain points that you all experience is just trying to understand, what is the NOVA language and NOVA terminology. So we've been able to work with product ops and just put forth some, and I'm not going to run through all of them, but we are looking to work to be able to provide a guide, a manual, something that you can reference. We understand and recognize the complexity of what this carryover tracking is going to present for a lot of you, and we want to be able to make that as user friendly to understand as we possibly can. So we do welcome and value the feedback. We've already received a few different feedback and screenshots, and that helps us take that information back, improve and make some updates. I think we had mentioned previously that this is year one. It's not going to be perfect, and so we will learn and grow together, and we are soliciting input from you all as you will be testing this for year one. So the first thing that we did as we go through these NOVA enhancements are breaking down some important terms and definitions to then help you understand the next slides when you're actually looking at the carryover and how is that being calculated. So the first term to make a note of, as you all are aware, with CAPE funding, we use a FIFO method. It's the first in, first out. This is going to be critical to understand as you are going into NOVA and you are trying to break down what is that carryover, why is it showing this. So that is really one of the biggest reasons why we're looking at carryover the way that we are. So first thing to note, first in, first out, is when an allocation has a multi-year spending duration. Expenditures are earmarked against the oldest allocation year first. Once a year's allocation is exhausted, expenditures are earmarked against the next allocated funding year. So as we know, with CAPE is allocated, CAPE allocated funds have a 30-month spending duration. So we know what allocation is, but it's the amount of funding distributed from the state to the consortium and distributed completely among the active member institutions each funding year. So I'm going to skip down to the true carryover, because now we're going to get into carryover terminology. And you're going to see this populate and you're going to hear this, moving forward. So it'll be really critical to understand, especially for the consortia as you are working with your members to identify what is their member and why am I seeing a true carryover and an AB 1491 carryover. So true carryover definition is a member's unspent available funds calculated when Q4 fiscal report is certified. This is the dollar amount that will be added to the next year's allocation to equal the available funds. So the calculation for that is you take budget, subtract the expenditures, and that equals the true carryover. So let's transition over to the next slide and we can break that down a little bit further. AB 1491 carryover, right? So AB 1491 carryover is the amount of funds that remain unspent on midnight, September 30th of each fiscal year. In instances where Q4 reports have been certified, these numbers will be equal. This is where we want to flag. It will be critically important for members to try and submit their quarterly reports on time. And you want to work with your members so that they are submitting this information in a timely manner. Because we will then be capturing what that carryover is going to look like when we do a snapshot on September 30th. If reports were submitted on time, then those two carryover totals will match. However, when Q4 reports have not been certified because let's say a member has passed the deadline and it hasn't been submitted, our system is going to capture a carryover. And this definition of carryover will be different from the actual carryover. This is a number used to determine consortia carryover compliance. So you're going to have allocation minus certified expenditures as of September 30th equals the AB 1491 carryover. We will work with you all. We anticipate, questions to be coming up. And so we will provide as much guidance and support, but one of the biggest things to take away is submit your quarterly reports, work with your members to get those submitted in a timely manner so that we are able to accurately capture the carryover information. And you're also going to see AB 1491 carryover percentage in NOVA. And basically what that is the percentage of the allocation remaining at the close of the fiscal year. And note, this is not based on the remaining budget. So we provided some additional examples of, and I think this is going to be very critical, as I mentioned, as you're diving into NOVA and seeing some of the flags and seeing some of the terms in there to help understand what that carryover calculation, how is that calculated and how are we arriving at that number? Next slide, please. All right, so we're going to walk you through the first update. So this update was actually implemented last year. There was a slide that Neil covered on member carryover where it provided a high state level overview of out of the 71 consortium, how many opted in, how many opted out. So this was implemented whenever the field was completing their fiscal year 22-23 CFAD. So there's no new changes here, but I know there was a question earlier as to where do you capture that member carryover threshold if you choose to opt in. So in the CFAD, what we did was we added the ability for each consortium to establish their own carryover compliance threshold. A consortium also has the option to opt out, and it gets revisited annually. You complete your CFAD on an annually basis, you're going to see this on an annual basis. So you'll be selecting to participate, keep it the same, opt out. You have the option to work as a consortium and decide how you want to implement and track carryover for your members. So should a consortium opt in by establishing a carryover compliance threshold, then what will populate is a corrective action plan threshold by quarter, and you'll see that at the bottom. So for year one, actually this information was preset by our NOVA developers. However, once the CFAD opens up for next year, 24-25, which should be opening up fairly soon, you will see this populate, and you're going to want to input what percentages you want it to populate. So that it flags once the fiscal quarterly reports are being completed. That is where this information will flag for you. And I'll show you in the next couple of slides how this will trigger in the fiscal report section. So the corrective action plan threshold is to monitor and encourage members to conform to an acceptable expenditure rate throughout the year. This will flag and let you know you're exceeding, this is how much carryover the member is carrying. So this is something that you actually can see now. It's one of those tools that is already available. And I think some of you may have already seen it or have had questions. So this should help clarify what updates were included. And should the members carryover exceed the corrective action plan threshold, then they will be asked to provide an explanation of the reasons during quarterly expenditure reporting. We have that in another slide, so we will cover that a little bit more in depth. Next slide, please. All right, so as you are completing your CFAD, this was also included in 22-23, where we updated question number 16 and number 17, and you will see this again in the 24-25 CFAD that you'll be completing soon. And there are 2 questions that were updated, and it is focused on AB 1491 carryover compliance. And these questions basically ask the consortia to define the member carryover percentage threshold and the process to monitor carryover. So this will be something that you will encounter fairly soon, and one of the updates that have already been implemented and was completed last year as well. Next slide, please. Okay, so now we're going to walk into highlighting some of the NOVA enhancements that will not be visible, but we just want to give you an idea of what's to come. But this information is not going to be available until after September 30th once Q4 is certified. So what we've done was we implemented some flags to really just help you, in different screens to be able to see and track if you've been flagged for carryover, whether at the member level or at the consortium level. So once again, important reminder that carryover compliance will be calculated in NOVA upon Q4 certification. That is going to be on September 30th at 11:59 p.m. If you certify your Q4 report before that, then that is when it'll capture. If you certify it, or if you don't, but let's say your members are late and they don't submit and certify, we will still calculate September 30th. So that is where we're going to run into the true carryover and the AB 1491 carryover. If a consortium has carryover in fiscal reporting, then a tag will populate next to the consortium name, and we'll show you in the next slide. But if the member has carryover, then you will see, remember the consortium is on an annual basis. So it's always only going to say year 1 consortium. However, for the member, they are being tracked on a 2-year basis. So let's move on to the next slide, and then we can break that down even further. So these are mock-ups examples of what you will see once September 30th comes around. We've incorporated the green dots are basically to show you what are going to be, what you'll be seeing, what you'll be noticing. And CCC, thank you, Susan, stands for carryover compliance. You will notice where there will be a flag next to the consortium, and that will identify that the consortium has been flagged for 1 year. And you will also see one next to the member. Under Alan Hancock, you see CC 1 year, and it's tied next to the CCD. However, if once they reach 2 years, then you're going to see it in red where it says CC 2 years next to Antelope Valley Union High. So some examples, you can also filter consortium carryover statuses or by member carryover statuses. So those are just some future features that you are going to see after September 30th. Next slide, please. In addition, we are trying to work to make NOVA, as much user-friendly as possible by trying to include helper text, definitions, information, as much as we can to really help you, the user, understand what you are using on this platform. And so one of the things that we did was you can hover over, and this is actually something that you more than likely you have already seen this, because this is something that is currently live in the fiscal reporting section. where this top tool basically is just an alert letting you know what the consortium carryover totals are, what that percentage of carryover is, and then if you hover over the carryover compliance, it'll just give you a definition of what does this mean? What is this telling me? So it's just some helpful information. Serves as an awareness flag for monitoring. But this isn't the only place, so we're just walking through where you're going to see these different features incorporated. Next slide, please. All right, so now we're going to get into the fun stuff where it's really been getting complicated, right? So the fiscal reporting update. So this is a mock-up. I did want to highlight that. And it basically, what this section, this enhancement was intended, it's to give you an idea of how year 2 will populate by providing flags if a member has excessive carryover. So you're not going to see this yet until year 2, but this is an example of what that table is going to look like, some of the flags that you are going to see. However, the following slides will dive into this further, including that member corrective action plan. So next slide, please. All right, so let's use some examples. So example A, as you have been completing your quarterly reports, you're probably seeing this table and it's, you're wondering, what is this percentage? What am I looking at? This information is not matching. This is where we value your feedback and input, because we will continue to get better at providing information or including helper text, terminologies, things that can help you, better understand what you are looking at. So this was actually a recently updated description. Thank you to, I think it was Siskiyous who sent that in for us. So we were able to take that feedback and incorporate that definitions or provide greater description. So that can help you break down what you are looking at when you see this table. And the recently added the description details under the member carryover compliance status. So if you see that heading, you're going to see description. It gives you an explanation of what is it that we're looking at, expenditures, and the next slide will give you an example of if you see a negative, what does that mean? And then the carryover amount and carryover percentage. If you see that red arrow, I wanted to point to that because I know I've looked at it a couple times and I'm also wrapping my head around this. So I wanted to make sure that as you're looking at it, you are not getting confused or thrown off by what that percentage is. But to clarify, that 80% is basically what we talked about in slide number 26, right? When we said you're completing your CFAD, if you're going to opt in, you're going to select the consortium carryover threshold. Let's say your consortium selected 20%, and then it populated the section, the corrective action fiscal reporting quarterly thresholds. Those percentage will then populate on this end of the fiscal reporting section or the dashboard. So it's just letting you know what is your, as a reminder, your carryover threshold. So it's populating some of that information for you. And the carryover threshold percentage is not the consortium selected carryover threshold from the CFAD. So just wanted to clarify that in case you see that. I also wanted to highlight one important reminder that this information is going to be up to date as of the time of viewing. So this would be one section that as the members are reviewing and reporting on their quarterly expenditures, this information is up to date as of the time that you are viewing. So this is, because of this legislation that we've started it this year, we're in the middle of it. You won't officially see more updated information until Q4 is certified. However, until then, the members are able to look at this portal, this section, and you'll be able to see how you're tracking towards carryover, towards that deadline. And then once that deadline is reached, the numbers will be made official. Next slide, please. All right, so here is another example. And the first thing is, you know, a year goes by, we're all learning this. You are completing your CFAD early on in the spring. You're in the middle of the year, you're looking at this information, reporting your quarterly report. So the first thing you want to look at is the carryover threshold percentage. If it says NA, that basically means go back to your CFAD because more than likely your consortium opted out. So because your consortium opted out, that means they did not include a percentage carryover threshold for members to track, which also means they did not include those percentages. So it's not going to pull forward. So that would be your first sign. You know, throughout the year, we might forget, you know, did we participate or not? And so if you see the NA, it basically means your consortium did not participate. So you're not going to see that tracking populated. What you're also going to see under expenditures, and we put like a definition for you. So if you see negative expenditures and the math is not adding up, one of the reasons, which is why we put the definitions for you to refer to, is because of FIFO. So our system is going to capture or expend those first in, first out funding. So if you have carryover from prior year, that is why you're going to see that negative, and it's not going to reduce your allocation or carryover amount until you expend those carryover funds from prior year. So we're hoping that description can help clarify what you are looking at when you are looking at those numbers and something might not be making sense. But if there's any questions, you can always reach out to us or KTAP, and we will help provide additional support. Next slide, please. The member corrective action plan. This is newly populated now based on carryover. So in your fiscal reports, I've noticed that some of you have already been flagged and some of you have already completed this. So this is going to populate current year, and this might be a way for the consortia leads to go in and review, because if the member is being flagged, it'll let you know who you want to monitor and talk to from within your consortium, because the member, if they have been flagged for excessive carryover, then it's going to populate this member corrective action plan. And it's basically when a member's quarterly expenditures are entered, NOVA will calculate the carryover percentage for that quarter. Should a quarter's carryover percentage exceed that of the corrective action fiscal reporting quarterly threshold, remember that is tracks to the CFAD, and then you're going to see that in the fiscal reporting, then a corrective action plan will appear as required. The corrective action plan is a single narrative asking for an explanation of the steps taken to become compliant with the corrective action fiscal reporting quarterly threshold for the following quarter. So to distinguish, this is at the member level. This is your flag members to let you know you're reaching, you've got carryover, you want to take a look at that. And then the written expenditure plan is at the consortium level, and that is where the consortium will be flagged. So two separate, but two different flags in place. Next slide, please. So if carryover exceeds threshold, so remember as a reminder for members, if the carryover exceeds the threshold, then for year one, for the members, there's no action that you'll take, but the system will flag. Year two, then the consortium members may vote to reallocate carryover amount of the members exceeding consortium determined threshold. Allocation adjustments are made in NOVA and designated as carryover compliance. So we're going to transition, like let's fast forward now, and let's say it's September 30th has passed. This would probably be in 2025. Next year, 2 years tracking has passed. We're at the point now where we've identified one of our members who has excessive carryover, and we've, as a consortium, voted and decided to reallocate a member's excessive carryover. So next slide, please. So what that is going to look like is it'll still be conducted in a similar process from the when you're doing an allocation amendment. So you're going to select Start Amendment. Next slide, please. And what you will see, and this is something that you probably already see and maybe have come across. So when you're getting ready to perform an allocation amendment specifically due to this excessive carryover, you will then select what type of allocation are you completing. So you're going to identify that it's tied to carryover compliance, and you're going to provide an explanation, provide a detailed explanation of the events that took place resulting in the allocation amendment. The system will also ensure that you are not allocating or performing an allocation amendment greater than what is available. There are some flags in place, but as we walk through the next slides and the tools, before you get to this point, you're going to want to ensure that you are sure of what that member's carried over. So a lot of communication and reviewing the reports to ensure that you guys are all sure what that carryover in fact is, to avoid performing an allocation amendment for something greater than what was not supposed to. So the member carryover slides talked about the different measures in place, the percentages, what the consortium can vote to decide how much, how little, and that'll all be on you to, as you guys are working on your CFAD, as you are working on your bylaws, that'll be something at a local level to determine. Next slide, please. The consortium written expenditure plan, we talked about that flag. How does that look in NOVA? So as a reminder, if the consortium is flagged for exceeding the 20% carryover threshold, then they're going to be prompted to complete a written expenditure plan. The consortium lead will actually receive a notification and alert to complete the written expenditure plan in NOVA. You will see that in the next couple of slides, what it will look like. It's not available yet until the first round is completed. So after September 30th. Approval of the plan will be required by the majority of consortium members, and approval is also going to be required by the state. So we will review and approve or ask questions based on the information that you are putting forth. Next slide, please. This is an example. It's a mock-up of what is going to be released. You will see an action item, as was mentioned. The consortium lead will also receive a reminder. You're going to see this when you select your consortium. You're going to scroll to the bottom, and this is only going to populate if the consortium is flagged for year one of having excessive carryover of greater than 20%. So you'll click on the written expenditure plan. And if we go to the next slide, we will give you an idea of what this is going to look like. The questions are on there are just mock-up examples, but this is an example of what the written expenditure plan will look like. There will be a series of questions. There will also be a section for our TAP to provide, information on the type of technical support that was provided to the consortium. Information, upload options, the ability to upload documents. So you'll be able to see that. Hopefully you don't have to see that if your consortium is working on addressing the carryover. But if you are one of the lucky few to test this out later this year, you'll get an opportunity to see and complete the written expenditure plan. Next slide, please. All right, so I am done talking, and I'm going to transition this over to Susan, who's going to take it from here. Susan?
Thank you, Myra. And Mandley, I'm going to take that screen share I'm going to take the screen from you briefly. Thank you so much. And then I'll pass it back to you when I'm done. So right now, just a moment. There we go. Now, hopefully everybody is seeing the screen. Yes, it looks like that's true. I'm just going to walk through some of the dashboard reports briefly that we're developing to be available. It's pretty exciting with Product Ops, our partner. And here we have, okay, so first we have coming here, and I stage up some other examples if we needed them. We're in CAPE, and I'm just on the standard page. And then if we go to reports, you'll notice that we now have this new section called carryover reports. And so if we click on that, it takes us to the report page. And I don't think everybody, oh, loaded faster than I expected. As I had it ready in another tab in case it didn't load as fast. But here is the set of dashboards on this page for it. And then we see allocation year. So as the years progress, we can change the years that we're looking at in this report. So I'll start there and you just click on it. And then you can remove a year or you can add a year. It just has all the years we have available in CAPE. So prior years probably won't be very useful to you, but the future years, starting with 23, 24 will be. And then after, remember, always when you make a selection in Nova, after you have made your selection, remember to hit the refresh update button that's off in the right-hand side. And then that updates the dashboard that you're seeing. We have a list of the data definitions over here in this little section right here. So if you're like, what is the true carryover versus what is the carryover compliance? Here's formulas for the carryover amount, carryover percentage, carryover consortia threshold, and then the member carryover thresholds, because those are two different things. We can, right now there isn't anything in here, but what you will be able to do is for consortia carryover compliance status. Remember, a lot of this isn't going to be effective until Q4 of 2023-24 is certified. So it won't be effective for or available or show any information for some months yet. Anyway, but you'll be able to click into this and it will show you the information. And then here's one for the member carryover compliance status, same thing, clicks into it. And we have some that will work better. Okay, so the next dashboard that comes up is the carryover compliance allocation reduction report. Of course, this hasn't happened yet, but should a consortium's members decide to reallocate some carryover for one of the members, that information will show up here in this report. You'll be able to see that, and you can see it over time. And remember, that's just for 1 year. Okay, next is fiscal report status, and this is by quarter. So this is getting developed right now. Oh, and the statewide true carryover, let me back up and I'll start here. If I click on that, it says 103.3%. If I click on it, it will show me all of the consortia, everything that's making that number. And then if I click on one of the consortia, it will show just that consortium itself right there. Okay, which is pretty cool. And I can hit back or I can download this information or I can hit a close button, but we have some information. Oh, and notice it's not in alphabetical order. If you wanted to do that, you can just sort on these arrows that go up and down. So that makes it sort. So it's pretty easy to use that. I'm not going to wait for it. I'm going to close it and move on. And the next thing we have is this fiscal report status, which would be by quarters. And the same thing, if you click into it, it will bring up a report that lists all the members and consortia that are contributing to that. But right now, there isn't any data there. So the next one is consortia true carryover and fiscal report status. So what's neat about this is that we're looking at 23-24. We see submitted fiscal reports, and here's who we are to date. And remember, we're on Q2 right now, so this should be accurately reflecting what we have, and then approved fiscal reports. So if I click into one of these, and I can click on any of these. I can click on the name. I can click on the bar. You know, the bars are just draw my attention more because they're colorful. But I could click on the dollar amount too, and it will show me the members that are contributing to that dollar amount and what those dollars are. And then if I can click on that again, it just shows me a close-up view of that single member. I can close that. And then I can come down here and I see this great bar chart. Now notice a couple things. We have all of the consortia listed here, but we couldn't fit all the consortia don't fit on here. They are all represented, however. You just have to kind of hover over each one of these and then you'll see the consortia name and you'll be able to see reporting by quarter in here. This is also continuing to be refined because, well, this should be for 23-24 too. Q2, Q1, and if I click into it, I can explore it and show all 80.4% that have reported. And it shows me the consortium. And if I click on, let me click on one of these. It should be showing me because of course it's not working perfectly just in the middle of the demo. You do that again. You take another. It should. Heavens to Betsy.
So if you click, Susan, on the, if you select one of the members above and you click on the carryover percentage,
Mm-hmm.
so where it says consortia, true carryover, and fiscal reports up above, the next table.
This table right here? Yes.
And if you select one of the red or anyone,
Any
yeah.
of them. Mm-hmm.
And then if you, so it should show you the member level breakdown depending on how many members. I think this example.
I picked a small one. Hang on. Let me get one that's a little bigger. Here. Barstow. I had that in my examples earlier because I had some other pages showing. We picked Barstow and there are the members in Barstow. And then if we click on one of these again, it should show the quarterly member carryover percent. And if we, yeah, that was just the same thing. Yep. So you can, oops, I'm sorry. Let me close this. So this one down below, also this bar chart shows information and you can click on it and open up show all 117.5% and it will show you that consortium, that row closer. This is more or less the same information that is in this consortia true carryover and fiscal report status. It's just showing it by quarter and color coded on a bar chart so you can see where the movement is quarter by quarter. And that is the last one of the dashboard reports that are developed at this time, always taking recommendations for additional. So you can submit that to Cape Tap and it will get moved forward. And I'm going to hand that back to you, Myra, and to Mandalee to resume the, there we go, to resume the slide deck.
Okay, thank you, Susan. Give me just 1 second and I'll pop back over.
So I just wanted to make just a quick comment reminder. So as you are, wrapping your head around distinguishing the carryover thresholds for the member level versus a consortium carryover. So even though at the member level, you're able to decide and vote if you want to implement that, just know that whether you opt in or opt out, the 20% consortium level carryover tracking, that is what will probably catch up to you. So if you are addressing it, if you're not addressing it, that carryover tracking at the consortium level is where you could still be flagged if you are not addressing it, or even if the consortium has, as a whole, the legislation is looking at the entire funding. within the consortium. So even if some of, there's been, I know, concerns around the fiscal agent holding some of that funds. Altogether, it's looking at that total carryover amount. So the consortium will still be flagged. You'll have the ability to provide your rationale in the written expenditure plan, but it is something that you are going to want to look and begin to monitor what that carryover total as a whole is at the member level, at the consortium level, so that the legislature looks at that information. And so it's very important that you are using that funds as you are supposed to, be spending that money within your region to serve your students. But it's something that you definitely want to be monitoring, looking at the consortium level carryover, the member level carryover, and tracking that all together. All right, Mandalee.
Okay, thank you. Let me go ahead and just change slides. So with that, we're just going to transition into how we here can help you. So there are some resources that were initially mentioned earlier on, and I know that I popped it into the chat earlier. I'll go ahead and do it again. We are going to work quickly to make sure that we remediate this slide deck, so you will have all of those live links. You can find those also in the chat, but also on our website. If you go to our website, then you go to administrators, and then you go to guidance, you're going to see all of the guidance there listed, so you can easily access or download. If you have any questions, if you have any just need a little help or clarification, feel free to reach out to us. We're here and happy to help and support. We also have some professional development coming up in February. We had a consortium that was at the Cape Summit, and they had a wonderful session on their bylaws and how they handle carryover. So they're taking a deeper dive. We have a two-part series coming up on the 22nd and the 29th. I threw in a QR code for those of you that like to register right now. Go ahead and do so. We welcome you. Otherwise, we do have a link in the chat. They will be 2 one-hour sessions from week to week, and we do invite you to come by and learn from them. Other areas that we can support you are some of the tools and resources are in Nova, those forecasting tools, as Myra had gone over, and Susan so well. There are a lot of reports there that will support you in the work that you do, and we are here to help you with that as well. We have some of our services here on the right-hand side, some Nova workshops, some professional learning circles, which we also invite any feedback on. Please feel free to reach out to us if there's a topic that you really would like to dive into with your colleagues as consortium directors. Let us know and we'll bring that to the forefront. And as always, if there is anything that we can do, you can email us. We do encourage you to use our support request system. You can do so by logging into the website and then clicking support request. And it's just as simple as that. And we'll get back to you as soon as we are able. And if it's an immediate concern, you're always welcome to give us a phone call. Holly or I will be the ones on the other end of the line, hopefully to answer your questions and support you with whatever you need support with. And with that, I think we will open it up to any questions and saying our thank yous to everyone, to Myra, to Susan, Neil. I know Jeff was silent, but in the background supporting as one of our Nova people with eyes and ears. So we really appreciate everyone that has supported this and giving you all of the information. Hopefully that makes you feel a little bit more comfortable and at ease as we dive into carryover compliance.
Mandalee, I think Kelly Henwood had a question during the demo. I'm not sure if she got her answer.
Okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and stop share now, if that's all right, so we can see those boxes and possibly lovely faces. Let me go through the chat.
I think we're up to
Kelly-
speed on the chat.
Okay, so Kelly, was your question answered?
I don't think so. Sorry, I'm having IT issues. I think I need to play with it more, but my question was, is the numbers in the carryover compliance report connected to our region's number? And it doesn't look like it is.
Okay, Are you, when Susan was sharing screen, are you talking about the bar graph? Is that,
I think so. I think I need to spend more time in these reports so I understand it, but I think it was the carryover compliance dashboard.
okay. Take a little time to explore that. And then if you'd like, you can always shoot us an email or we can get on a Zoom and we can look at it together. So we're looking at the same numbers. All right. So if there are any other questions.
I think Janae has a question in the chat, a new
Okay.
question.
Okay. Janae, do you want to come off mic? Okay, so I'll read the question. I just found it. Is the 80% carryover threshold percent amount in the example A slide the total percent carryover threshold amount for all members? So Janae, I think you're referring to if you select in the CFAD where you would put in the percentage and then it would provide that forecasted carryover for the member at the member level per quarter. That would be for all of your members. It would automatically populate. And Myra, you can jump in and correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, so we can learn together. So that's basically on slide number 32. I think if that's the section you're referring to, Janae, the carryover threshold percentage, because you're calling out 80%. So that is not the consortium. So that is not to be mistaken with what you selected as the consortium carryover threshold in the CFAD, but rather it's the trigger percentages that you are going to input in the CFAD to alert you how you are accounting up against the carryover. So this would then break it down for you as a member. Yes. So in this example, so this is letting you know as a member, as you are completing your fiscal reporting and you're looking, it's going to give you your allocation, your expenditures, your carryover percentage. That carryover threshold is what was entered when the CFAD is completed. So we mentioned that for last year or this current year, 23-24, NOVA pre-populated that for you. This year, when the consortium is completing the CFAD, if the consortium is selecting to participate and opt in and they select a carryover threshold, then they will input those percentages. So it's basically just bringing that forward. And then I think that was on slide number, scroll up really quickly, number 26, if we're able to scroll. So right there, so that corrective action fiscal reporting quarterly threshold, those are the percentages that are populating in that example A. And you'll have the ability to select, you can keep them at that standard. It's just going to flag and let you know, it's going to let your members know how they are performing against that carryover. How much carryover do they have? So you get to select, you can use the same percentages or you can use something different, but then that is going to trigger if they are exceeding or carrying, not spending against that carryover, then they're going to complete that member corrective action plan.
Okay. Thank you, Myra. And it looks like that answered it for Janae. So we have a few more minutes. If there's any other questions that would like to be popped into the chat, can you put up slide 12 again? So excuse the quick flip, but I will get us back to 12. This vote or the majority membership vote, is this the one you're looking for, Janae? Okay. Yep. All right. All right. So seeing no questions, hearing no questions, we'll go ahead and start to begin the closeout. Want to thank everyone for taking their morning and joining us today for almost an hour and a half. Holly has popped into the chat an evaluation link that we kindly ask you take a few moments to please fill out. It really does help inform how we support the field and how we develop our professional development. And then if there are any recommendations, there's an opportunity for you to share that in that evaluation as well. I will share out the PowerPoint as soon as it's remediated. So that'll take me a couple, I'll probably have that out to everyone by the end of the week. The video will take a bit longer to remediate, and that goes to a third-party vendor. Once that's remediated, it will be posted to the website. All remediated items will be shared with all registered attendees as they become remediated, just so you have it in your inbox and then can source it again on the site. And then with that, unless Myra, Neil, Susan would like to say any closing remarks, we can move to close out.
Yeah, just thank you, Cape Tap, for your support and helping us put on this presentation. Thank you all for sticking with us for an hour and almost an hour and a half. I hope you all have a great day. Good luck. We will continue to be here to support as you go in and test out. Remember, some features may not be available, some currently are. I think the PowerPoint will help provide some additional clarity. But as always, reach out and we will help provide some additional information and help you figure this out. We'll work through this together. So thank you, Neil and Susan.
Thank you, everyone, and have a great rest of your day. Bye for now.
Thanks, everyone.